The phone call came at 3 in the morning. Mom's voice, shaky and unfamiliar, cut through my sleep like broken glass. Daniel, I need to tell you something. About the house. I sat up in bed, already knowing this wasn't going to be good news. The house. Our house. The one Dad built with his own hands when I was 7. The one where Mom taught me to ride a bike in the driveway. The one where we carved pumpkins every Halloween on the front porch steps. What about the house, Mom? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear her breathing, uneven and labored. I sold it, Danny. I had to. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something inside my chest collapse, a foundation giving way. You what? The medical bills, they're too much. The treatments for your father's Alzheimer's, the specialist appointments, the medications that insurance won't cover. I didn't have a choice. I stood up, pacing my apartment, my mind reeling. Dad's condition had been deteriorating for 2 years, but this was something I never saw coming. Mom, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? You have your own life, your own problems. I couldn't burden you with this. Burden me? That house wasn't just property. It was everything. Every Christmas morning, every birthday party, every scraped knee that Mom bandaged at the kitchen table. It was where Dad taught me to throw a curveball in the backyard, where I brought my first girlfriend to meet my parents. Who bought it? Maybe we can work something out. Maybe they'll sell it back. Another pause. This one felt different, heavier. A development company, Meridian Properties. They're going to tear it down, Danny. They're building some kind of luxury townhomes. The rage hit me like a freight train. Not just anger at the situation, but fury at the callousness of it all. Some corporate vultures swooping in to devour my childhood and turn it into profit. How much time do we have? They're starting demolition next month. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I hung up the phone and stood in my dark apartment, feeling like I'd been hollowed out. 28 years old, working as a financial analyst, and I couldn't even save my own family home. But something else was building alongside the grief, something cold and calculating. I'd spent the last 5 years learning how corporate acquisition worked. I understood leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, and asset liquidation. Meridian Properties had no idea what they just walked into. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the old neighborhood. I needed to see it one more time before they destroyed everything. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but that might have been the grief distorting everything. The maple tree Dad planted when I turned 10 had grown massive, its branches now reaching the second-story windows. The front porch where we used to sit during summer thunderstorms looked exactly the same. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours, memorizing every detail. The way the morning light hit the kitchen window, the crack in the driveway that we never bothered to fix, the basketball hoop that still hung over the garage door, net long since rotted away. A for sale sign had been replaced with a sold banner. In the corner, I could make out the Meridian Properties logo, a sleek, modern design that screamed efficiency and profit margins. I took pictures, hundreds of them. Every angle, every corner, every memory preserved in digital amber. Then I went home and started researching. Meridian Properties wasn't some massive corporation. They were mid-size, regional, specializing in residential redevelopment. According to their website, they focused on acquiring older properties in established neighborhoods and converting them into higher density housing. Translation: they bought people's childhood homes and turned them into profit centers. I spent the weekend digging deeper. Financial reports, property records, board member information. The company was privately held but had been aggressively expanding over the past 3 years. They'd acquired over 200 properties in our metro area alone. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about every family they'd displaced, every memory they'd bulldozed, every neighborhood they'd carved up for profit. Monday morning, I walked into my boss's office. I need to take some personal time, family emergency. He barely looked up from his computer screen. How long? I'm not sure yet. Could be a few weeks. Fine. Just make sure Henderson covers your accounts. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, not because I was quitting, but because I had a feeling my life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. The first step was gathering capital. I had about $40,000 in savings, which might as well have been pocket change for what I was planning. But I also had something more valuable: 5 years of experience analyzing corporate vulnerabilities. I started making phone calls. College friends who'd gone into investment banking, former colleagues who'd moved to private equity firms, anyone who might be interested in a unique opportunity. The pitch was simple: a regional development company with aggressive expansion plans but questionable financial stability, perfect target for a strategic acquisition. 3 days of phone calls netted me 6 interested parties and one very promising lead. Marcus Webb, a former client who'd made a fortune in tech and was looking to diversify into real estate. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Marcus was exactly what I remembered: sharp, instinctive, and always looking for the next big move. So you want to buy a development company to stop them from tearing down your childhood home? That's the emotional reason. The business reason is that Meridian is overextended and undervalued. They've been growing too fast, taking on too much debt, and cutting corners on due diligence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me. You've done your homework. I've done more than homework. I've found their weakness. I slid a folder across the table. 3 weeks of intensive research, financial analysis, and strategic planning. Meridian's debt structure, their property portfolio, their cash flow problems, and their upcoming loan renewals. Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine intrigue. They're leveraged to the teeth. 92% debt-to-equity ratio, and their primary credit line comes up for renewal in 8 months. What's your play? I took a deep breath. This was the moment where everything either came together or fell apart. We don't try to buy them outright. We buy their debt. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Their debt? Half their loans are held by Coastal Regional Bank. I have connections there from my previous job. If we can convince the bank that Meridian is a credit risk, we might be able to purchase their debt portfolio at a discount. And then? Then we own them, call in the loans, force them to restructure, and gain controlling interest in the company. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, still studying the documents. Finally, he looked up. How much do you need? $2.5 million, plus another $1 million in contingency funding. And what's my return on investment? Conservative estimate, 15% annual return once we restructure their portfolio. Optimistic estimate, we could double your money in 18 months. Marcus closed the folder and extended his hand. I'm in. The next month moved like a blur. Lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, and endless paperwork. Marcus introduced me to his network, and suddenly I had access to resources I'd never imagined. But every night, when I drove past the old house, I was reminded why I was doing this. The demolition notice had been posted, 30 days until they started tearing down my childhood. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During my research, I discovered that Meridian had been cutting corners on their environmental impact assessments. Nothing illegal, but definitely aggressive interpretations of regulatory requirements. I contacted the city planning office and requested a review of their permits for the redevelopment project. Not to stop the project, but to delay it. Every day I could buy was another day to complete the acquisition. The planning review triggered a temporary halt on demolition. Meridian's lawyers were furious, filing motion after motion to expedite the process. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and I needed every advantage I could get. Meanwhile, the debt acquisition was moving forward. Marcus's reputation opened doors that would have remained closed to me. Coastal Regional Bank agreed to meet with us, and their loan officer confirmed what I'd suspected. They were nervous about Meridian's expansion rate and debt load. They're current on all payments, the loan officer explained, but their growth model is unsustainable. Too much leverage, too little cushion for market downturns. What would it take for you to consider selling their debt portfolio? 70 cents on the dollar, and proof that you can service the debt if they default. Marcus and I exchanged glances. 70 cents on the dollar for $18 million in debt meant we needed $12.6 million, more than we'd planned, but not impossible. Give us 48 hours, Marcus said. We walked out of the bank in silence. Finally, in the parking lot, Marcus turned to me. You sure about this? $12.6 million is real money. I thought about my father, sitting in his care facility, no longer recognizing my face. About my mother, working double shifts to pay for treatments that might not even help. About the house where I learned what family meant, about to be reduced to rubble in profit margins. I'm sure. Marcus made 3 phone calls. By the end of the day, we had the funding. The debt purchase went through on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, we owned $18 million in Meridian Properties debt obligations. Now came the delicate part. I called Meridian CEO directly. James Morrison, 45 years old, MBA from Wharton, reputation for aggressive expansion and cost-cutting measures. Mr. Morrison, my name is Daniel Chen. I represent a private investment group that has recently acquired your company's debt portfolio from Coastal Regional Bank. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 7 seconds. I'm sorry, what did you say? We now hold the primary position on your credit facilities totaling approximately $18 million. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss our expectations going forward. This is highly unusual. I'll need to speak with our legal team. Of course, but I should mention that we're exercising our right to accelerate the review timeline for your credit facilities. Instead of 8 months, you now have 60 days to demonstrate continued compliance with all loan covenants. Another pause. Longer this time. 60 days? 60 days. I'll send over the formal notification this afternoon. Looking forward to our meeting, Mr. Morrison. I hung up before he could respond. The formal meeting took place in Meridian's conference room the following week. Morrison had brought his entire executive team, CFO, general counsel, head of development, and 3 people whose titles I didn't catch, but whose presence was clearly meant to intimidate. I came alone. Gentlemen, Morrison began, I have to say, your acquisition of our debt is unprecedented. We've had a solid relationship with Coastal Regional for 5 years. Business is business, Mr. Morrison. Banks sell debt portfolios all the time. I'm sure you understand. The CFO, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, leaned forward. Our financial position is sound. We've never missed a payment, never violated a covenant. You're absolutely right. Your payment history is impeccable. However, your debt-to-equity ratio currently sits at 92%, and your interest coverage ratio is barely above the minimum threshold. Morrison's jaw tightened. Those ratios are within acceptable parameters. Acceptable to Coastal Regional, perhaps. My investment group has different risk tolerances. I opened my briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Financial projections, market analysis, and restructuring recommendations. 3 weeks of 18-hour days distilled into 30 pages of corporate surgery. What we're proposing is a partnership. Strategic restructuring that reduces your leverage, improves your cash flow, and positions you for sustainable growth. The general counsel spoke up. What kind of partnership? Debt to equity conversion. We convert $8 million of your debt into equity shares, giving us a 43% stake in Meridian Properties. The room went dead silent. Morrison's face had gone pale. You want to buy nearly half our company? I want to save your company. Your current trajectory is unsustainable. The real estate market is shifting, and you're overextended. Partner with us, and we can help you navigate the transition. Refuse, and we'll be forced to call in the loans and pursue other remedies. Morrison stood up abruptly. This is extortion. This is business. You have 53 days to decide. I packed up my briefcase and walked out, leaving them to contemplate their options. The next 2 weeks were a game of corporate chess. Meridian's lawyers tried every angle, challenging the debt purchase, questioning our financing, filing complaints with regulatory agencies. But Marcus had assembled a legal team that anticipated every move. Meanwhile, I kept driving past the house. The demolition delay was still holding, but barely. The planning review would conclude soon, and once it did, I'd have no more bureaucratic shields. The pressure was getting to Morrison. I could see it in the industry publications. The way Meridian's public statements had become more defensive, more desperate. They were hemorrhaging confidence, and their partners were starting to ask questions. On a Thursday morning, Morrison called me directly. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you come in this afternoon? I arrived at Meridian's offices at 2 o'clock. This time, Morrison was alone except for his CFO. The intimidation squad was nowhere to be seen. Coffee? Morrison asked as I sat down. I'm fine, thank you. Morrison looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. His usually crisp suit wrinkled at the shoulders. Your terms, the debt to equity conversion. What exactly are you looking for? I told you. 43% equity stake in exchange for converting $8 million in debt. And then what? You clean house? Bring in your own management team? I leaned back in my chair. This was the moment where I could either be vindictive or strategic. The personal part of me wanted to watch them squirm, to make them pay for every family home they demolished. But the business part of me knew better. I'm not interested in running Meridian day to day. What I am interested in is shifting your focus, less aggressive expansion, more sustainable development. Projects that add value to communities instead of just extracting it. Morrison exchanged glances with his CFO. You're talking about a fundamental change in our business model. I'm talking about a business model that doesn't require 92% leverage to function. The CFO spoke up. What about current projects? We have 17 properties in various stages of development. Most of them can continue as planned, but I want veto power over future acquisitions, and I want a community impact assessment for every project. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. There's one project in particular, a property we just acquired in Riverside Valley, single-family home, scheduled for demolition next month. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. What about it? If we agree to your terms, what happens to that project? I pretended to consider the question. Depends on the community impact assessment. If demolishing that house serves the greater good, then we proceed. If not, we find an alternative approach. Morrison nodded slowly. I need to discuss this with our board. Can you give us until tomorrow? You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. After that, the offer expires and we move to foreclosure proceedings. I left Meridian's offices feeling like I was walking on a tightrope, so close to everything I'd worked for, but still one wrong move away from losing it all. That evening, I drove to Dad's care facility. He was having one of his bad days, staring out the window without recognition when I walked into his room. But I sat with him anyway, holding his hand and talking about the old house. Remember when we built that treehouse in the backyard, Dad? You insisted on using galvanized screws so it would last forever. Said anything worth building was worth building right. He didn't respond, but his fingers tightened slightly around mine. I'm going to save it, Dad. I'm going to save our house. The next day dragged like a death march. Every phone call made me jump. Every email notification sent my pulse racing. At 4:30, I was convinced Morrison would let the deadline pass and force us into foreclosure proceedings. At 4:58, my phone rang. We accept your terms. I closed my eyes and felt 5 weeks of tension drain from my shoulders. Excellent, I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. There's just one condition. My eyes snapped open. What condition? The Riverside Valley property. We want to complete that project as originally planned. The rage came back like a wildfire. They knew. Somehow, they'd figured out that the house was personal to me and they were trying to use it as leverage. That's not negotiable, Mr. Morrison. Community impact assessments are part of the deal. This particular property doesn't require an assessment. We've already committed to the development plan, signed contracts with subcontractors. Canceling now would cost us hundreds of thousands in penalties. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. If I pushed too hard on this point, they might walk away from the entire deal. But if I gave in, I'd lose the very thing I'd started this for. Let me get back to you on that, I said finally. I hung up and immediately called Marcus. They're trying to play hardball on your house, he said after I explained the situation. What do you think? I think they're bluffing. They need this deal more than we do. Call their bluff. And if I'm wrong, then we foreclose, liquidate their assets, and probably make more money in the long run. Marcus was right from a purely financial perspective, but this had never been purely financial for me. I called Morrison back. The answer is no. Community impact assessments are non-negotiable, and that includes the Riverside Valley property. Then I'm afraid we can't accept your offer. Then I'm afraid you have 48 hours before we begin foreclosure proceedings. Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison. I hung up feeling like I'd just lit a match in a room full of gasoline. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. Marcus tried to reassure me that Morrison was bluffing, but I wasn't so sure. Meridian's stock price was plummeting as word of the debt purchase leaked to industry publications. Morrison was under tremendous pressure from his board and investors. On Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Morrison again. We need to meet. Tonight. I'm listening. Not over the phone. There's a restaurant called Chez Laurent downtown, 8 o'clock. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and waited at a corner table. Morrison showed up exactly on time, alone and looking defeated. You want to destroy us, he said as he sat down. I want to restructure you. There's a difference. That Riverside Valley property, there's something you're not telling me. I met his gaze steadily. There's lots of things I'm not telling you. That's how business works. Morrison ordered a scotch and stared at it for a long moment before speaking. 5 years ago, my daughter died in a car accident. She was 16. After the funeral, my wife and I couldn't stand being in our house anymore. Too many memories. We sold it to a development company that tore it down and built condos. He took a sip of his scotch. I swore I'd never put another family through that. But business is business, and sentiment doesn't pay the bills. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Why are you telling me this? Because I think that house means something to you, and I think that's why you're here. I was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. My father has Alzheimer's. My mother sold our family home to pay for his treatments. Your company bought it. Morrison's face went pale. Jesus. So yes, it means something to me, and yes, that's why I'm here. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Morrison spoke. What if we restructured the project? Instead of tearing down the house, we restore it and build around it. Create a small community with the original house as the centerpiece. I felt my heart rate spike. That's possible? It's possible. More expensive, definitely. Longer timeline, but possible. And your board would approve that? Morrison finished his scotch and signaled for another. If it's part of the larger restructuring deal, they won't have much choice. What changed your mind? 5 years of sleepless nights. I'm tired of being the bad guy in other people's stories. We shook hands across the table. The deal was done. The paperwork took another 3 weeks to finalize. Lawyers, accountants, and regulatory approvals. But on a cold Tuesday morning in November, I became the largest shareholder in Meridian Properties. My first act as a board member was to approve the Riverside Valley Restoration Project. The second was to establish a community impact assessment requirement for all future developments. The house renovation took 6 months. We restored the original structure while building 3 smaller homes around it, creating a small community that honored the neighborhood's history while providing modern housing. I moved back into my childhood home on a Saturday afternoon in May. Dad wasn't well enough to see it, but Mom came for the first time since she'd sold it. We sat on the front porch where we used to watch thunderstorms, drinking coffee and watching the sun set over the maple tree that Dad had planted when I turned 10. I can't believe you actually did it, she said. Sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to let go. Mom reached over and took my hand. Your father would be proud. Think he'd remember it? The important parts, yes. Love doesn't disappear just because memory does. That evening, I walked through every room of the house, touching walls and door frames and windowsills. Everything was exactly as I remembered, but somehow different too, like a song played in a new key. In the basement, I found something the renovation crew had missed, a pencil mark on the wall where Dad had measured my height every year on my birthday. 8 years of growth captured in small horizontal lines and dates written in his careful handwriting. I traced each mark with my finger, remembering the ritual. How Dad would press his hand on top of my head to make sure I stood straight. How he'd always add an extra quarter-inch and wink at me when Mom wasn't looking. The last mark was dated 5 days before my 16th birthday. After that, I'd gotten too cool for height measurements, and Dad had stopped asking. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. How's the new place? He asked. Perfect, and thank you for everything. Thank me after we see next quarter's return on investment. I laughed. Speaking of which, Morrison wants to schedule a board meeting next week. Apparently, we have 3 new acquisition opportunities. Good problems to have. After I hung up, I stood in the basement for another hour, surrounded by 28 years of memories. The ping pong table where Dad taught me to play. The workbench where he showed me how to use power tools. The corner where I used to hide when my parents fought. Upstairs, I could hear the new neighbors moving around in their homes. Families starting their own collections of memories in the community we'd built around my childhood. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally planned. It was something better. Something Dad would have understood, even if he couldn't remember it. Sometimes the most powerful victories aren't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes they're about proving that love and determination can rewrite the rules of the game entirely. I walked upstairs, turned off the lights, and went to bed in the room where I'd grown up. Outside my window, the maple tree rustled in the night breeze, its branches reaching toward the stars like arms stretched in celebration. The house was home again, and this time, no one could take that away.